Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. If you hit subscribe, remember we land in your feed automatically to listen to me, Rob Harris from Sky News, Tariq Panja from the New York Times, and alongside me, here on the banks of Loch Lomond, Martyn Ziegler from the Times.
Yeah, good to be with you guys. I think this is the first ever pod coming live and direct from Scotland. We are here for the International FA Board, IFAB, which deals with the laws of the game. Gianni Infantino's in town, the British associations, various FIFA people, friend of the pod, Victor Montagliani from CONCACAF. So it's already been interesting.
Martyn, you drove from your home in Yorkshire. I was just wondering, did you take the high road or did you take the low road to Loch Lomond?
I took the electric road in my new electric vehicle. So I think I'm probably the greenest person coming to my IFAB today because, yes, I've fully electric and stopped and charged up en route.
Sustainability here. Tariq, Gianni Infantino probably delighted not to see you here.
I don't know why. We've known Gianni Infantino many years. It's a rare chance to see him in person and maybe a chance to ask some questions that the people around him aren't really asking him these days.
You are being talked about, though. Quite a few people have still mentioned that Alexander Sheffrin exchange at the press conference a few weeks ago in Paris.
Maybe that's the shortage of press conferences to blame, Rob. We're only being talked about because we're not having them that often.
Yeah, but we have had some interesting times. The three of us were all at the FT Business of Football conference this week. We heard from quite a few notable figures there, didn't we?
Yeah, Javier Tebas, La Liga, president was there. Lucy Fraser, the culture secretary, gave a sort of interview. She didn't take any questions from the floor. I thought generally there was a sort of sense of disappointment about what she said. The fact she didn't sort of engage with any questions, didn't seem to sort of address any issues around the regulator. So I think slightly dissatisfying performance by her, I thought.
Yeah, she did claim that other countries around the world, I think Spain in particular, she was claiming might be looking to follow their regulatory system. And of course, a lot of attention on how much authority the football regulator would have on football finances. Not that much, it would seem, and we'll get into later the big verdict in England. That's on the Everton points deduction, with Everton partially winning their appeal with fault found in the Premier League's legal case. But one of those big names at the FT conference was the La Liga president, Javier Tebas. And Tariq, it was a chance to particularly ask him about his changing opinions. Someone who was railing against Saudi Arabia in the past, but now very much on board with them, aren't La Liga?
Yeah, that was the thing. It might have been at the same event. Javier Tebas, to be fair to him, is never shy of fronting up in front of the media. So every time he appears at this FT conference, which he's come to, I think, the last 3 or 4, he has a round table with the media. And a couple of years ago, he rounded on the Saudis by claiming that all they were trying to do was whitewashing their image and not everything has a price. I just wanted to remind him that he'd said that, having agreed to sell very lucrative sponsorship rights to the same country he accused of whitewashing their image a few years ago.
And what was his response?
He said, essentially, times have changed. The world isn't a photograph. I think that he meant that was a snapshot of 2018, 19, 2020, post-Khashoggi. And the world is different. Everybody's trading with Saudi Arabia now. Why shouldn't La Liga? But it was him who was the most bellicose opponent of Saudi Arabia. That was the point. And he said football has a special place in the world. It's not a normal business.
And a lot of that was over the piracy, wasn't it? Be Out Q. And how the game feeds were being taken by that pirate operation in Saudi Arabia in the battle against Qatar and beIN Sports.
Yeah, that's right. That's another element of this. Of course, La Liga was one of the many sports organisations affected by the massive piracy project that was led by Saudi Arabia. But the fact that he also brought in Khashoggi and human rights not so long ago and has quickly changed it. But then his point is Saudi Arabia has moved on. It is trying to reform, and he has been there and seen it. So, from that, take what you like.
Yeah, that probably sums up the whole sort of debate around Saudi Arabia, doesn't it? And another big announcement by the Saudis and sport this week, Rob?
Yes, if I say growing together to you, it's the bid slogan for the Saudi Arabia 2034 World Cup. We've got a logo for the bid. Exciting times, the bid's in operation. Who's going to win this bidding process for 2034?
Yeah, well, I suggested that perhaps it should be grown together instead of growing together. But yeah, so spending a lot of money on a logo, and who's their main opposition to host the 2034 World Cup? Who are they bidding against, Tariq?
A country known as Tumbleweed, I think.
It's interesting. I mean, they certainly had to put together all this big release and announce their plans and their vision with this slogan. Certainly keeps the branding experts busy.
But guys, while you're there, I mean, Gianni Infantino is in Scotland. It'd be interesting to see what he has to say. You know, it is a total waste of money. Could this money, in seriousness, could this money be used somewhere else? Saudi Arabia isn't bidding against anyone. They've made it a fait accompli. What is the point of all of this waste? Hope there's no travel involved, because that's just, you know, waste of energy there as well, isn't it?
But wouldn't you be the first to complain, even if it's uncontested, that they haven't gone through any sort of attempted process to assess the bid, the stadiums? Are they nominally going to go through a human rights assessment and checking on the facilities?
No,
and that can be technical training grounds and things like that as well.
Fine. No, I won't, because I wouldn't be the first to complain, because I've already complained and I'll still complain. The whole process, Rob, was that they've been delivered the World Cup in 2034. And that's still something that should be complained about. But let's not go through, I guess, a kind of fake process. It serves no purpose to anyone.
Well, the 2034 World Cup was not the only FIFA event that Saudi Arabia are looking to host. They've actually been given an event this week. They're going to be staging 2 of the 4-team pools in the new FIFA Series, another new event launched by FIFA, originally announced in 2022. It's about men's international friendlies between particularly lower-ranked nations at the moment. But I certainly think when it was originally announced, we were expecting perhaps this would be some bigger, newer international series. I don't know, Brazil against Spain or something. The only teams that have ever appeared at the World Cup are in it are Algeria, Bolivia, Bulgaria, and South Africa.
Yeah, what a surprise that Saudi Arabia is hosting this new series. I mean, shocked and stunned when I saw that announcement. I mean, who would have thought?
Yeah, they get 2 of these hosting centres, I think. And also, I noticed complaints from Africa as well that the countries chosen there aren't the ones that are most in need of games like this. And South Africa, of course, is the home of the CAF president, Patrice Motsepe, FIFA vice president.
Looking at that, this is about trying to give those countries that don't necessarily play at World Cups in particular a chance to play matches against teams from other continents.
Yeah, like on the surface, as Martyn said, like the idea as pitched is great in a way, right? You have FIFA organising things that maybe some of these national federations that don't have resources are able to do themselves. But what we've seen so far is quite underwhelming. Maybe it will develop into something, you know, a bit better, a bit more useful to some of the FAs that really needed this.
Yeah. Maybe not going to capture everyone's attention around the world in terms of trying to sell the television rights. The games in Saudi will feature Cape Verde, Cambodia, Equatorial Guinea, and Guyana.
Trip for those countries. And yeah, and if it's about football development, good to face different types of opposition. And that focus on Saudi, just as you mentioned, it wouldn't surprise me if in a few weeks, a few months, we announce or we hear the announcement of a new FIFA office in Riyadh or somewhere like that, if all roads are leading to Saudi.
You know, he's also been in Saudi Arabia in the last week or so, had a bit of success, quite a notable football figure. Who do you think won the horse race worth more than $1 million there last week?
I know the answer to that, and it's a famous figure of Manchester United legend, Sir Alex Ferguson.
Yeah, Spirit Dancer, winning what's been called the world's richest race in Riyadh. He certainly was enjoying himself there.
That's not where he cracked his rib being hugged by his friend, was it, Rob?
I think it might well have been. He's certainly enjoying himself at 82.
Good for him. Deserves all the success.
Well, back to Premier League matters and that Everton verdict. That was a huge moment when the Premier League announced the 10-point deduction on the Merseyside club, the biggest ever punishment in the club's history for about £20 million overspend of the profit and sustainability rules. Everton appealed on 9 grounds. 2 of them were upheld. And what was quite notable is they found what were called errors in the Premier League's case. What exactly were the grounds then that they had the points deduction reduced to 6?
So there were 2 legal errors. One was that the initial commission had said that Everton had breached the utmost good faith rule, that they had to show utmost good faith, and they hadn't done so. So that was one of the legal errors. Although I actually had some sort of, when you look through the full findings of that, to me it looked like actually the Premier League was more than happy to give way on that particular matter, and the actual appeal board findings I thought seemed a little bit strange. That first of all they said that that was a legal error to say they had done that, and then secondly they said, well, actually, that what Everton said about their stadium financing was an aggravating factor. So it seemed to almost have it both ways. But yeah, the other legal error is that they didn't take account of the available benchmark. So they didn't look into what the EFL had done with its own financial fair play rulings, for example, involving Sheffield Wednesday, which they should have done. Which, to me, it just seemed like a sort of a convenient way of getting something that would be acceptable to everyone, take the heat off the Premier League.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask you. In terms of a process, how much of this is political? Because why are these, if this is an independent body, its job isn't to take heat off the Premier League. It's an independent board. If these points deduction should be 10 or 6 or 2, it's not for me to say, I don't know. But this is the job of these bodies. But if you're saying now that they found a convenient place that kind of makes everyone a little less angry and that's the outcome, that doesn't seem like a kind of proper system.
Yeah, and that's also perhaps a response maybe to some of the outrage around and all that criticism that they face, particularly from the politicians. So you could have taken the view they were meddling and undermining that Premier League case, but they will feel vindicated that they spoke up so strongly, some of those particularly from Liverpool or the wider region as well, in terms of saying the Premier League got it wrong. They were being too harsh.
Yeah, Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, Everton fan, he sort of weighed in, wrote on their behalf. They think, oh, well, we've been justified. I actually thought the other interesting thing which we saw at the FT summit was John Textor, the American businessman who's owns the biggest shareholder of Crystal Palace. And he said to some journalists after his presentation that the financial rules of the Premier League are broken. They're designed to keep the richest on top, which is, that's what a lot of Everton fans have been saying. I think it's going to be quite a challenge, actually, when the new financial rules are agreed by the Premier League. Is how do you avoid that?
As one of the things being pointed out, Dan Ashworth potentially, well, he is going to be leaving Newcastle United to join Manchester United. The fact that the ambition was sort of limited in a way at Newcastle United. They are restricted by the PSR rules, so he can't go out and spend a lot. I mean, he could obviously work to develop players, whereas at Manchester United there's more scope to. So have those financial rules denied Newcastle someone who could help to sort of grow the club?
Yeah, probably. But then on the other hand, you'll have people thinking you don't want a nation state coming in and causing huge amounts of inflation in the market. And if you spend crazy amounts of money, then everybody has to try and keep up, and that sort of that hurts the whole of English football. So that's the argument, the counter argument for having some sort of regulation.
And this came up when we heard from the Culture Secretary, that's the British Cabinet Minister who holds the sports brief, Lucy Fraser, who spoke at the start of the FT conference, and she was welcoming foreign investment, saying it's good for competition in the Premier League, and basically the football regulator, if it ever comes, wouldn't be meddling in whether or not there should be state ownership.
She also offered a very narrow definition of what this regulator will be and what it won't be. This isn't a catch-all regulator. She very much said it's to do with takeovers, broadly speaking, and how they'll be funded. And then she kept repeating that she was a conservative, i.e., they don't like regulation. So it's not this big thing that perhaps it's been built into. Even when it comes into force, the football regulator, I don't think, is going to be a massive game changer from what she's saying.
Yeah, it looks like pressure from some of the football entities did lead to its powers being reduced. It would no longer be recommending things like financial penalties or points deductions. No sporting sanctions would be recommended by the football regulator. So, one sense is it could become quite a toothless entity that requires a lot of resource. She talked about jobs being available. I think they're looking for a chair of the football regulator. You need experience in matters around football regulation. So, there's one for you, Tariq.
Yeah, can't wait. The applications in the post, but I think you might get to the bottom of the column pretty quickly, Rob.
It'll be interesting to see what sort of person actually does get that job. Do you need to have a financial background? Do you need to have a regulatory background? Could you be a lawyer? Or could you just be someone who's sort of, has a history of administration in football?
Well, the question I have, based on what you described with the Everton thing, whether this was a kind of political settlement as well as one based on rules, means how much of this will be diplomacy as well. And the thing fans are asking for is transparency about all of this stuff, I think, whether it's what the regulator does or whether it's what the Premier League does with the point deductions.
On the one hand, saying that the information they provided on the stadium grant was an innocent mistake, and then in the same ruling that it should be viewed as as at least a partial aggravating factor, because what they actually told them about the stadium debt wasn't accurate. So yes, it's sort of slightly contradictory.
And of course, there's still another Everton case to come, because they were charged again with two overlapping seasons in terms of how the Premier League assesses breaches, which is over a rolling 3-year period, and you're only allowed £105 million of losses, and they've been charged up to the end of the 2022-2023 season. Verdict should be in April. We've got the hearings coming up.
Yeah, they'll be done in the next couple of weeks. We're having Nottingham Forest have got theirs coming up March the 7th. The interesting thing around the second Everton charges, the issue of that 2 of the years has already been, you can argue, have already been dealt with, because it's calculated on a rolling 3-year period, their losses. So if you've already been basically had 6 points deducted for 3 years of financial issues, then actually you can argue, and I think with some justification, that you should only be punished for 1 year for the second time around. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's somewhere like 2 or 3 points.
The issue still being all around the season could end the Premier League campaign with a lot of asterisks and not actually knowing the final outcomes, because there could be appeals pending.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mess already. We've got a league table that's been moved up and down, with Everton -10, then -6, and then something else to come, and then a possible appeal. Maybe we're also going to have this rule change, I guess, moving forwards. They're about to agree a new overhaul of this system. So, fun and games for us to follow.
While we're at the FT conference, news landed from Italy as well of a huge doping ban, 4 years for Paul Pogba.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I'd say, not unexpected. Tested positive. 4 years is the sort of standard ban under WADA rules. He's insisting that it was unintentional, but as in all these things, athletes, sportsmen, footballers are responsible for what they put into their bodies.
Yeah, that mitigation will be tested at the Court of Arbitration for Sport, where Pogba will appeal.
With substance itself, DHEA, what's a compound promoting the production of hormones, so it can include testosterone that is generated.
Clearly there are benefits to taking that sort of thing if you're a sportsman. It can increase your strength, increase potentially your running speed, and certainly it can increase your power for remaining 100% fitness throughout the match. It is all about performance enhancing.
Yeah, and what a sort of decline for Paul Pogba. Once the world's most expensive player, wasn't he? 105 million euros when he moved to Manchester United. That was in 2016, wasn't it?
Yeah, not only that, there was that controversial transfer, his late agent getting next to 14 million euros out of that, paid by three parties. But also, just in terms of Paul Pogba, the player and the figure, such a towering player at his best. He won the World Cup with France in 2018, was huge at Juventus, and this decline has been long-standing, even before this doping ban. Last couple of seasons at Manchester United, the move to Juventus didn't work out, the injuries, and also that crazy case that we discussed with the extortion case involving his friends and his brother. It's been an awful few years for Paul Pogba. It's been quite sad to see.
Yeah, I mentioned there transfer fees, the money of the transfer market, and perhaps one figure who comes to define the transfer window these days, Fabrizio Romano, more used to himself being the conduit of news and information, pushing out lots of transfer news, but he's making headlines himself. He's being written about in Norwegian publication, been looking into perhaps what leads to information on his feed.
Yeah, a couple of Scandinavian media organisations have looked into this. I mean, in a way, it makes sense, but at the same time, I think it's quite remarkable. The company behind them is basically telling clubs, if you want to publicise a transfer or something, then you need to pay, and we're talking thousands. In some cases, £1,000 for that, because he's got a huge social media following. This, but perhaps you could say this is what influencers do. What do you think, Tariq?
Yeah, it's really interesting, this line between what is an influencer and what is a journalist, and what is the relationship with clubs and influencer stroke journalists. And this influencer company, it's called Memo, MEMMO, and it offers birthday greetings, messages from celebrities. And Andreas Sileas, the Norwegian journalist, one of the two journalists, one in Denmark, who wrote about it, told me he contacted Norwegian celebrities who appeared on that site. They said, yes, it's bona fide, it's very professional. They pay on time. If people want to get a happy birthday from, I don't know, Øyvind Leonardsen. I don't know if Øyvind's a member of this, just using his name. They can
maybe the FIFA Council would want birthday greetings from you.
Well, perhaps. Look, there you go. And tell them it'll be free. Just we'll see them at a press conference. That'll be best if we could do it there.
One council member did come out of one of their private lounges and gave me some FIFA Club mints once, so that's a declaration.
Yeah, I know you mentioned about newspapers paying for stories. This is slightly different. This is basically somebody or companies or football clubs paying for coverage. So it's the other way around, isn't it? So I suppose that's the sort of the difference here.
What some could call advertorials, but Fabrizio Romano not commenting. Did they approach for comment? Didn't say anything?
That's right. Yeah. That, to be clear, hang on, just to be very clear, they have approached him, both the Danish media and Andreas on his website, have contacted Fabrizio Romano for comment, and he had not commented at the time we recorded this podcast.
And of course, a very different type of figure. He doesn't claim to be someone who holds institutions, clubs, governing bodies to account or ask those sort of questions that we do. He's merely a very successful conduit of information on transfers and things that a lot of people sort of turn to him to. And he also has featured in transfer announcements himself from football clubs. He's appeared in their videos at times, part of the PR machine, in fact.
Just to go back to more sort of serious stuff, in Scotland this week, just down the road from where we are, the World Athletics Championships, indoor championships are happening, and they took the decision to award the 2027 World Athletics Championships to Beijing ahead of Rome, which I think it's not the first athletics competition that's going to be held then in the next few years, is it?
Now, after Glasgow, the next indoor World Championships will be in Nanjing in China. So 2 big World Athletics events going to China. And Tariq, we've mentioned issues in China in the past, particularly the clampdown and the discriminatory attitudes towards the Uyghur minority population. Is sport largely just forgetting this concern about China?
I think sport's forgetting the concern about anywhere, really, when it comes to hosting decisions. I think wherever you get the biggest check still seems to be the idea. And China has been, I guess, in the background since the coronavirus pandemic. If you think about it, China was seen as a potential World Cup host in Asia. That's not been talked about. Saudi Arabia has taken all of that thunder and a lot more. Having these events in China now seems like a throwback to a different time, doesn't it?
Yeah, time when FIFA was really in the embrace of China. That was where the new expanded Club World Cup was due to be, partly derailed those plans by the pandemic and perhaps China losing its place, the centre of the football orbit to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, the sort of Chinese interest in football has just collapsed, basically. Everywhere you look around the world, Chinese ownership of football clubs is sort of declining. This week, West Bromwich Albion, historic English club, Chinese owner Guochuan Lai sold his 87% stake in the club to an American entrepreneur. So I think this is just indicative that the Chinese government actually is no longer that focused on football, and it's certainly not in their medium-term plan.
So the World Athletics Championships taking place just down the road from us, the Indoor Championships, an Olympic year. Perhaps I've not really felt much of a sort of huge build-up to it. Some of those issues being talked about. Seb Coe being asked about the enhanced games. I don't know why he gives it attention. This is those publicity-seeking events about whether you should have a load of doped-up athletes competing against each other.
I said that to Ziegler before we recorded this today, and I was like, it's bizarre. I don't think anyone had been talking about the enhanced games except the bloke, the Australian guy behind it. And then now the World Athletics president weighs in, and you're going to get maybe a couple of days of news stories out of it. But Rob, what about the athletics championships themselves? Again, maybe I'm not paying as much attention as I should, but I only realised when you told me the other day, I think we saw each other on Thursday, that there's these global indoor athletics championships taking place. You don't see much coverage of those, whether it's on social media or on traditional TV or other platforms. You're not getting that vibe around these big championships like you did in the past.
I mean, it's not getting cut through, and perhaps it's just not having some of those big names. They got Noah Lyles, even who's going to be competing, and Karsten Wollholm. So these are names, but perhaps the athletes don't realise they need to sell themselves a bit more. They're fighting against particularly football. Look at that. We're here at IFAB, lawmaking body. There's probably more coverage around of Infantino talking about no blue cards than many of the things that happen at the athletics.
No, for sure. I mean, I think you have to say the indoor worlds have never had as much focus as the sort of the world championships as we know them, taking place in the sort of the big outdoor stadiums. So I think, except that's an issue. Certainly in Britain, the BBC's covering it, so they get terrestrial coverage, which I think is important for the sport. But it's one of those constant things and I think an issue for the whole of British sport itself is the sort of domination of football and increasingly, Premier League football, and it's sort of, the effect on the rest of sport is something that everyone has to keep a watch out for.
Well, football was knocked off the sports pages at the top of them anyway. This last end of the week, I noticed, and it's another sport that has actually done well to draw a new audience. Maybe not like this, but Formula One and Drive to Survive have brought a new audience to that sport. But this week it was more kind of, I guess, unpleasant news for the sport with that investigation into the Red Bull team principal, Christian Horner, and the allegations made against him by an employee. But they exploded into the newspapers, into the press at the last 48 hours of the week. With
what investigation itself from the parent company cleared Christian Horner, find no wrongdoing in terms of his conduct. They are a private company, didn't release the findings publicly, as perhaps you might expect from a sports governing body. And then he was back to business ahead of the Bahrain Grand Prix in practice and qualifying, overseeing things. We've never heard from the complainant, who has her anonymity, but then various purported bits of evidence landed in email inboxes across the world of sport, journalists and people in F1. Evidence that perhaps many listeners might not realise might have seen its way onto sort of parts of the internet, but as media, we exercise a lot of caution. So even now, we're not going to reference what really is in those messages themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen them, and it's having seen them, and no wonder that has caused more problems for Christian Horner, and his position is again under threat because it asks some sort of fairly serious questions about his future. So it's as Rob says, anyone who wants to search for the internet, I'm sure, can find them.
Well, the one thing I found kind of interesting with this case, and I haven't seen it in other sports, was and again, they wouldn't seem that outspoken, but just because maybe in football they might be, was the other team principals and characters from other teams almost expressing anger at how Red Bull dealt with the situation and how so much is still unclear, and very publicly. I've not seen that type of thing before in football, for sure.
No, and I think Toto Wolff in particular calling for greater transparency, which is probably about having confidence and faith in the whole process, which is something we often do, see calls for across sport. In many part, it would help us understand this case.
When you read the leaked messages, I mean, I wouldn't say they're sort of absolutely sort of dynamite, but in terms of wrongdoing, I think they're quite personal things. But again, it does certainly raise issues around how he was cleared, why he was cleared, the reasons on that.
Certainly dominating the talk of F1 as we start this new season. Well, that about brings an end to this week's episode of Sport Unlocked. Martyn, great to be alongside you here, Loch Lomond.
Yeah, we basically hear about possible changes to the law of the game, any developments around VAR. I think we've had the big news already when Gianni Infantino arrived and said we're giving the red card to the blue card, so no blue cards for sin bins, which sort of exploded a few weeks ago, and now looks like it's itself is going to be sent off the pitch.
Somewhere around the world, there is a factory full of blue cards with someone having printed them.
Guys, also, we're hoping for next week an update on what the FIFA president is wearing, because now that is extremely topical, given now he is a fashion icon. So look forward to that, guys.
Yeah, that beige hoodie jacket. I did actually have a hoodie on when I saw him yesterday. I was off camera. Well, thank you everyone for listening. As ever, if you hit subscribe, we land in your feed automatically, and you can message us at Sport Unlocked on X, Facebook and Instagram. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.